Hello guys, we are back in new fanfic, and if enjoying this then please share and like part 2. Now let's start the fanfic. Naruto gave him a flat look. Are you trying to get mead? You wanted proof, not an exploded lung or heart. His gaze flicked back to his Himiko clone. This way, if he does turn on his freaky eyes, he won't know it's me under a henge. This is the safest way to do this. He gave Sasuke a meaningful look. And we all know the rules. Sakura sighed. Yeah, we get it. She pouts. It would just be more entertaining if you were doing it personally. Naruto rolled his eyes. Dude, I already did. Once my clone gets the stupid date you all are demanding, does it even matter? I already did the initial work. He huffed, crossing his arms and puffing out his cheeks. Ma, if you get too loud people are going to start wondering what you're talking about. Kakashi was staring up at the sky with disinterest. He was amused that his students had convinced him to group henge for this outing. He thought they would watch from the roofs, but his team had made a solid argument about it not being in character for them. They pretty much never hung out as a team. If they wanted to watch the show, they needed to do so incognito. So, here they were, all hanged under different aliases to watch Naruto prove that a Hyuga had assisted a mere civilian. They had tried to do it before the exam, but they hadn't had luck running into the long-haired youth. The charade was put on hold until they actually spotted the genin wandering around the village. Lo and behold, their plan to stalk him after they were dismissed from the second stage in the exams had borne fruit. It was coincidence that Kakashi had been waiting on a nearby roof in order to congratulate them, and they had quickly drug him in on their quest before he could drag them away to their training ground for a proper celebration. Sakura's and Sasuke's jaws hit the table at the tea shop they were seated at. No way, hissed Sasuke, eyes wide. Kakashi smothered a giggle, just managing to retain his nonchalant demeanor. This was made harder by the pure dumbfounded expression on Neji's poor bun-haired teammate. Lee was completely clueless as Neji politely held out his arm to escort Himiko away down the street. Naruto looked like the cat that caught the canary. Told ya. Where are they headed? Sakura grabbed Naruto's arm and yanked on it. I wanna see this. Naruto groaned. Seriously. He wilted under her burning stare. Fine. My surveillance clone already sent me the signal that they're headed to Ning's. Sakura blanched, causing both Sasuke and Kakashi to glance at her. Ning's. She nearly squealed, only just managing to keep her voice to a hushed whisper. What is the significance? Demanded Sasuke, glancing down the street to spot Neji and Himiko rounding a corner out of sight. Ning's is one of the most prominent places to eat. The prices border on the insane. Only well-off people go there. Or people who save for months. Naruto groaned. Now I wish I had been hanged. That place has good food. Sakura's head snapped around. When? She demanded, grabbing his collar and shaking him. Naruto squawked and wilted under her stare. Couple months ago, an older gal whose travel chest broke open took me there after I helped clean up her stuff and carry it to her hotel. Discreetly, queried Kakashi. Duh. Naruto rolled his eyes. I only walk around town normal when we have to do 7 stuff. He glanced down the street. We better get moving if you wanna see the meal. They're about 2 blocks away from it. The 4 of them casually rose, Kakashi tossing down payment for their tea. They wandered in the opposite direction in a meandering fashion, taking a backwards route to Ning's. They paused a block away in a deserted alley. I can't afford that place, admitted Kakashi. He chuckled lowly when Sakura shot him a dirty look. He wouldn't admit aloud that before they became his genin, he could have easily afforded it. He was a little surprised when that thought crossed his mind. He hadn't really comprehended how invested he'd become until, well, reflecting on how much he'd actually invested monetarily. He felt both a flash of pride and sheepishness, which was an odd combination for sure. Sasuke grimaced. Is it worth it? He shot Sakura a questioning look. Sakura's eyes pinged as she clasped her hands together and gave Sasuke a large begging grin. Are you kidding? Sasuke scowled and kicked at a rock. He made a couple subtle gestures to Naruto, who discreetly acknowledged the coded signals and let a small chunk of lint fall from his pocket that blew away out of sight via some convenient wind. They all hovered a moment longer before suddenly Kakashi felt something heavy drop into his pocket. He blinked slowly before craning his neck down at the two boys. Seriously, it was said flatly, but the underlying disbelief was plain as day to them. Sasuke smirked while Naruto scoffed. You underestimate us, complained Naruto, taking off down the street after replacing his henge with a new one. This version looked better dressed, and the now well-groomed black-haired youth was walking stiffly with airs. What if his freaky eyes catch us? Kakashi asked, simply trying to be belligerent since Naruto had managed to drop a huge wad of cash into his pocket. He had no idea how the blonde had been able to do it without him noticing until the money was actually in his pocket. He was now sporting a bored-looking well-dressed black-haired man with said hair slicked back. Training, parroted Sakura, not breaking stride. She was sporting a very crisp kimono and long blonde hair done up in a very elegant twist. She automatically placed her arm along Sasuke's, who was also sporting a dark blue hakama and haori. Kakashi sighed. He felt a little put out that he was having a harder time ruffling their feathers lately. The hostess greeted them smoothly and led them to a table easily within sight of Neji and Himiko. Kakashi was internally impressed with his team's manners. Naruto had honestly surprised him, though he figured he probably shouldn't be, considering how elegant and proper his Himiko clone was acting. Naruto's poor eating habits were notorious. That they were all eating like properly raised nobles made him giggle on the inside. They were going to do some amazing things, and no one would ever know. Seriously. Perfect for spying and undercover work. He hadn't even gotten to that training yet either. They did it on their own. Sasuke scoffed lightly. I've been around Himiko for ages. It's still odd. He took a sip of his miso soup. The Hyuga is quite ensnared. He sneered. Sakura sighed. Poor fool. He has no idea. She smirked faintly at Naruto, tossing her blonde locks back over her shoulder. I stand corrected. Truly, Himiko is a dangerous individual. Naruto swirled his tea with a cool stare. I already informed you how powerful she is. I'm surprised you would doubt me. Don't antagonize, Kakashi chided lightly. It is an honest blunder, considering their reputation. He took a small drink of his sake. As things stand, however, we have been corrected in our error. Well done. Are we commemorating? Queried Sakura. She had a mischievous glint in her eye. Naruto sighed. It's already being taken care of. You're as prepared as always, remarked Sasuke. Only his teammates could read the slight frustration and tinge of respect in his tone. Impressively so, agreed Sakura. I assure you, others would be rather intimidated by your forethought. Naruto gave a noncommittal noise in the back of his throat. For a short time, they ate in comfortable silence. Naruto softly cleared his throat. Am I mistaken, or is he feeding Himiko dessert? His tone bordered on frosty. Kakashi hummed. That does seem to be the case. There was a lilt of humor in his voice. Himiko seems rather enthused by the action. Naruto growled lowly, so that only his teammates could hear him. If my second kiss is with another dude, I'm going to be pissed, he muttered darkly, expression still blank. Oh, Kakashi looked up from his sake. There was a curious glint in his eye. Sakura's cheeks turned an adorable pink. I'd forgotten about that. Sasuke's left eye was twitching. This sounds like quite an entertaining story, remarked Kakashi, leaning forward faintly and intentionally trying to crowd Naruto's space. Naruto shot him a dirty look. Let me just say, he said flatly, that my veritable vastness of luck only extends to games of chance. When it comes to human interaction, I fear the opposite is quite heavy-handed. Kakashi stared at him. Naruto simply returned the favor, with a nonplussed aplomb that secretly impressed the silver-haired Junin. Naruto frowned. We all agree that there is enough proof. His voice was tight. Sakura sighed. Sadly, it was adequate. Not as fulfilling as I'd hoped, but still adequate. Naruto's shoulders slumped slightly in relief. Good, because I'm about to cause a distraction. Kakashi blinked slowly. I beg your pardon. I don't believe anything has happened that warrants that kind of response. He is a Hyuga. He knows proper etiquette. Naruto pinched his nose. I fully understand that, but Himiko was only going to be in town temporarily. If things drag on, this is going to become far more complicated than a mere distraction. Ah, understood. Kakashi sighed and waved a hand dismissively. Very well, but please, make it tasteful. Tisk. You spoil my fun. Naruto lifted his empty sake saucer and gave Kakashi a bland look. The silver-haired Junin humored him by pouring a drink. Kakashi watched him in amusement as he took a faint sip. Don't blink, remarked Naruto, seemingly unfazed by the alcoholic drink. Sakura peered curiously at Neji and Himiko. Naruto chuckled. Not there. He gestured vaguely towards the door with his sake. 3 armored samurai, minus their helmets, walked briskly through the door. They paused just a breath, eyes scanning the room before landing on Himiko. They brushed past the flustered hostess and strode across the room. Neji was already eyeing them warily. The whole room was holding their breath, expecting a large confrontation. The lead samurai, with a large nasty scar down the left side of his face, moved his hand to rest on the hilt of his sword. His dark eyes were sharp, visage calm. Neji tensed subtly, and froze when all the samurai fell to one knee. Lady Himiko-sama, greeted the lead samurai. His voice was rough but commanding. I fear we have been summoned. We must make haste at once. Himiko didn't even turn to acknowledge them as she took another dainty sip of tea. After a long tense pause, she set her teacup down. What is so urgent that we leave a full month and a half in advance? The samurai hesitated, clearly uncomfortable speaking such information publicly. There was an assassination attempt, followed by numerous attacks along the south border. Your father has requested your immediate return, as he fears for your safety. Himiko sighed softly to show her disapproval. She did, however, rise elegantly to her feet. I beg your pardon, Hyuga-san. It seems our dinner is to be cut short. She smiled faintly when Neji rose to bow and brush a kiss across her knuckles. Our meeting was short, but pleasant. I hope you fare well in your matches in the following month. Be well, Himiko-san. The samurai rose and escorted Himiko out of the building. Team 7 remained in their seats, casually enjoying the dessert that had just been served. Neji remained seated at his table a good 10 more minutes before he finally sighed and paid, walking out the door more stiff than he had entered. Sakura turned an amused glare on the disguised Naruto. Well, that was dramatic enough for a cinema. Naruto was grimacing as he subtly rubbed his knuckles across his pants in disgust. I'm starting to wonder if I'm too good at this. Sasuke snorted tea out of his nose and started coughing as he valiantly tried to cover his face with a silk napkin. Kakashi smirked openly, holding out a second napkin to Sasuke, whose face was beet red and eyes watering. Sakura let out a tittering laugh that faintly grated on the ears. She snarled, green eyes fierce as sweat trickled down her face and made her eyes sting. Her clothes were clinging uncomfortably, and her hair was plastered to her head. Her hands were screaming in agony, and her body was trembling with effort as she struggled to keep up with Kakashi's asinine sing-song Ks. He'd been singing the same damn thing for the past hour and a half, and she was ready to use the last of her energy to chuck a kunai at him with every ounce of flagging chakra and strength she could muster. Bastard would undoubtedly dodge safely, but just the act alone would give her some vindictive pleasure. This was torture. She'd been attacking the huge boulder for an hour and a half, striking at a semi-crudely drawn silhouette of a person. Kakashi had sung a stupid children's rhyme, informing her it was her job to hit each area he called with absolute precision while expertly thrusting needle-thin chakra strikes from her hands. They'd had to move on to a boulder after her rage at her sensei's childish behavior caused her to splinter the tree trunk and bring it crashing down. The silhouette was starting to crumble around the areas Kakashi was demanding she strike. She was exhausted, considering she had to dip down low to hit the knees and toes area accurately. On top of the endless attacks, her arms were raining down on the impassive rock. It was a nightmare of a full-body workout. She knew she needed it. Not only was her chakra control and chakra reserves improving, but she was also physically gaining ground as well. She knew that she was improving in leaps and bounds, and it only reinforced that Kakashi's crazy methods were effective. But damned if she didn't want to strangle her sensei. All right, he called, clapping once to gather her attention. She dropped limply to the ground, gasping for air and body trembling with fatigue. He wandered over to her and squatted next to her prone figure. It's lunchtime. Let's go meet up with the boys, Her only answer was a grunt. He simply smiled and slipped her onto his back before taking off towards a hidden cave in a forgotten training ground. The cave was the perfect campsite, keeping their gear safely tucked away out of sight as well as letting them sleep out of the weather without the need for a tent. It helped that the cave turned sharply to the side once you got inside, a hidden offshoot leading to a more roomy area with a soft dirt floor. The offshoot cavern also provided a perfect way to hide the glow of their fire, and the smoke was filtered out through various cracks in the cavern ceiling. She groaned at being jostled, but gratefully let him carry her, as she really didn't think she could get back via her own efforts. When they arrived, Sasuke was scowling at a small fire, watching their lunch cook on a spit. About 3 feet away from Sasuke, Naruto was sprawled out face down, moaning piteously. Kakashi gently set Sakura on a rock on the other side of Naruto before dashing off to find some more wild berries and nuts for lunch, knowing his cute little genin could use the extra nutrients other than just the wild boar his other clone had caught after dismissing Naruto for lunch. Now that she was closer, Sakura could see that Sasuke had tremors running through his body as well, his clothes as damp as hers with sweat. Anime and manga, my everything hurts, bemoaned Naruto, his voice muffled. His usual jacket was missing, and his black t-shirt looked like it had been wrung out once already. Welcome to being normal, muttered Sasuke bitterly. This is normal? Naruto asked shrilly, his head popping up for just a moment to stare at them incredulously before it flopped back down with a solid thump. Sakura chuckled weakly. Yeah, this is what we regularly feel like trying to keep up with your ungodly stamina. Point to Kyuubi. That is handy. He turned his head to the side so he could look at his teammates. Kakashi came slouching into the clearing to perch on a rock opposite of Naruto. Though he pretended to be nonchalant, his clothes were also heavy with sweat and there was a sense of weariness clinging to his shoulders. So, he said in false cheer. Everyone enjoying their morning. I hate you, intoned Naruto, still prone. Kakashi just smiled at him, and after a long beat, Naruto groaned. Okay, fine. You're awesome and we love you for being a kick-ass sensei. His expression morphed into a pout. Still hate you, he said mulishly. There was no heat behind the words, so Kakashi simply chuckled good-naturedly. I'm with Naruto on this one, mumbled Sakura, wincing as she barely remained upright when she shifted to get more comfortable. She looked at Kakashi cautiously. Are we doing more of the same training after lunch? There was obvious dread in her voice. The silver-haired man just smiled at her until she dropped her head with a groan. He chuckled again. Just kidding. Training your body to its fullest is important, but you don't want it to be detrimental by overdoing it. After lunch we'll do an hour meditation session followed by an hour dedicated to honing your other senses. Zabuza is an expert at silencing, and I want you all to work hard enough you get better at finding a solution if you were to fight him. But you told us not to fight him, whined Naruto. Kakashi hummed in agreement. You're not, but he isn't the only one to have such skills. It would be wise if you all had a countermeasure if you are ever in a situation where you cannot rely on your eyesight. He gave Sasuke a meaningful look. It would especially benefit someone with dojutsu. Ninja with dojutsu tend to rely too heavily on it. It would be wise to find other methods of fighting so that if an enemy manages to exploit the known issue of over-reliance on dojutsu, you will still be able to continue the fight without it. Their sensei shifted, holding out his hand as his clone dumped some berries in his cupped palm. He watched his genin do the same. I'm not just saying this. Had we been forced to fight Zabuza and he used his silencing technique, I would have used my heightened sense of smell to find him. If I couldn't have done it, I would have summoned my hounds. So you're going to train us in olfactory? Sakura looked torn between being interested and being disgusted. Depends. He shrugs. Olfactory is something my clan was good at. I inherited that skill as well. However, what works for me may not work for you. That is why we will be spending an hour trying to hone your other senses. Depending on which is the most potent, we will work on training it up to combat effectiveness. Sasuke grunted. You said it, K, mumbled Naruto. That training is gonna be a nightmare. Anime and manga, Sasuke smirked. And here I thought you would have a harder time trying to sit still for meditation. Naruto flashed him a crude hand gesture. Naruto shifted uncomfortably under the dumbfounded looks his team was giving him. What? Why do you wear the jumpsuit? Demanded Kakashi. You're literally crippling yourself as a ninja. Naruto winced, looking down as his toe dug into the grass and dirt. It was easier. Without it, he shifted again, gaze darting to the side. He swallowed thickly. Do you have any idea how hard it was to walk around the village without it? Kakashi visibly winced. Right. Okay. He sighed heavily, his shoulders sagging with the weight of his student's response. He rubbed his face tiredly. Has it gotten better? The blonde did a weird twitchy thing with his shoulder, head, and hands in indecision. Sort of. He shrugged. Because I've been using Heng clones for everything, the villagers haven't really seen much of me since I became a genin. They haven't been quite so, he gestured vaguely. I dunno. Kakashi sighed. Naruto's eloquence for words always seemed to fall short when he was trying to explain things that tested his emotional control. Kakashi wasn't really surprised. The whole of Team 7 had that problem. But because they'd been training to read the subtler body language, they all understood what he was trying to express. Kakashi couldn't help but drop a hand on the blonde's head and ruffle his hair. Would you be able to handle it now? Naruto squirmed a bit, squinting up at his sensei in uncertainty. Maybe, he mumbled, looking away. You know I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important, Kakashi pressed, feeling guilty when Naruto looked torn between making his sensei happy and fear that had most likely been beaten into him. Anime and manga, but you said my other senses were pretty enhanced too, murmured the blonde, a lilt of hope in his voice. Kakashi simply kept his hand on the blonde's head. They are, and we will train in them too. But this, he gestured vaguely at Naruto standing there dressed in just a pair of shorts. This is a big deal. Your sensitivity with air vibrations is phenomenal. Do you have any idea how incredibly useful that would be to you? Especially as a wind element. Kakashi shook his head. You have the potential to be nigh untouchable, if trained correctly. Naruto wilted. Okay. Kakashi felt a huge weight of pride and guilt as he watched his young genin shuffle towards his teammates. He was proud when Sasuke lightly bumped into Naruto and Sakura outright slung an arm over the blonde's shoulders in order to comfort him. The Junin knew he would need to do something to silently apologize for pushing the issue and also to show support. He cleared his throat and tried to throw in some levity. Naruto, I heard this rumor about a bet against one of Guy's students. Naruto blinked before a devious smile lit his face. It has been almost a week. The Junin eye smiled. And Guy always encourages follow-through on challenges, be they won or lost. Clones? Asked Sasuke. A grin was threatening to curl his lips. Cha! Cheered Sakura, thrusting her fist up in the air. My chakra should be replenished enough now. This was followed quickly by a groan of pain for moving so excitedly. Kakashi chuckled. Ma, slow down. Did anyone remember to grab a camera? All three of his genin snorted. He blinked at them, bemused they'd managed to do so in sync. We all have one stored in our gear at all times, began Sasuke. Sakura nodded sagely. After all, proof is everything. Plus, There's always a need for research, remarked Naruto, reminding the silver-haired Junin eerily of a certain Sanin. Kakashi eyed the blonde cautiously. Research? Of course. Stepped in Sakura. It's really handy for a disguise if we're playing tourists in a new area and need to scout out a place discreetly. We might even get lucky and lift some tricks off ninja from other villages. Sasuke leaned against a tree calmly, arms crossed. Kakashi hummed. Sharingan. Sasuke shook his head. Too obvious. A camera is much safer. We've even used a seal to mute any noise it makes, courtesy of that one you used for our bunker. You could just get eyewear, remarked Kakashi. Most people who wear eyewear are dojutsu users, so still too obvious, remarked Sakura, shaking her head. We've discussed the idea before. The best idea would be to wear a full face mask that encourages anonymity rather than possible dojutsu. Problem being, however, we're actively trying to keep up masks. We need people to see us. The only way we could get away with a disguise is 1, we all were going anonymous, and 2, the Hokage allowed us to do secret missions that he personally assigns and keeps out of standard files. Anything else would be pointless. Kakashi beamed at them, impressed with their thoroughness. You'd have to be Chunin at least, he remarked blithely. Naruto frowned. Actually, I wanted to ask about that. Are we taking this shot seriously, or are we trying to fail? Kakashi blinked. What? Naruto shifted uneasily, glancing at his teammates for support. Both nodded subtly, so he continued. You've been stressing the need for masks, but in order to become Chunin, we'd have to ditch them to even be taken seriously during the testing. If it isn't obvious to everyone that we're capable, the council could protest the advancement and cause us to either stagnate or get bumped back down. He lifted a shoulder in a partial shrug. This is going to be more of an issue for Sakura and I than it will be for Sasuke, but even he might get jilted by other ninja who think he only got the rank because of his clan status. Naruto scratched his head nervously. So, I guess, do you want us to take this seriously? Or did you want us to wait? Sakura took up their line of questioning. We understand that you might have only entered as to show us a better example of what the life of a ninja was like, maybe even just to get a feel of what other villages' techniques are like. We also weren't sure if becoming Chunin would separate our team. There have been cases that good teams stay together their whole careers, but we haven't yet proven we're better together than separate. If that was a concern, you might wish us to fail so that we could stick together longer. She shrugged. We aren't sure what direction you want us to take. We would prefer to stay together. 1. We're learning a lot from you and we don't want to give that up. 2. We're the only ones who know how talented we each are and can take full advantage of those skills. Breaking up our team now would be hazardous for both our training and our missions. The fact we've been so effective with our masks only proves that point further and adds the frustration of having to include other people in the loop. 3. We want to advance together, and advancing does open new options and possibilities for us, but we are willing to wait for advancement if it means we can't stay together as a team. 4. She shuffled, shooting embarrassed but endearing looks to her teammates, who gave her soft smiles in return. We're Team 7. Their following smiles now included him, and he felt his heart twist painfully. Kakashi had no idea how his crazy scheme had managed all of this, but damned if he wasn't super proud of them and touched that all 4 of them, yes, he's including himself in that, lived up to his expectations of teamwork, and excelled far past them too. Anime and manga. Hell, he didn't want to give them up either. He was going to have to speak with Hiruzen again. This was getting more complex, but in the best way, in his opinion. He'd fight to death and beyond for these 3. He scratched his jaw, pretending to think about it in order to hide the fact his eye was a little misty. Give me a couple days to run some things by the Hokage. He gave them an eye smile. For now, treat it like you want to win. He waved his fingers airily. After all, there's no better motivation for training than wanting to achieve a high goal such as winning the Chunin exams. His cute little genin beamed at him. You bet, Kakashi, cheered Naruto, throwing in a fist pump for added emphasis. Hey Dottie, called Naruto, waving wildly. Tenten, usually one to lash out harshly at such a ridiculous nickname, hardly twitched. She was staring blankly past them, arms hanging limply at her sides. Naruto shuffled over to stand next to her and follow her line of sight. He couldn't see anything out of the ordinary. Why do you look like you've seen something freaky? He squinted around again before looking back at her for a response. She rose a shaky hand and pointed to Neji talking to someone across the street. Neji looked like someone had come up and outright slapped him out of the blue. The blonde tilted his head in confusion. Dude, Prude always looks like someone stuffed a stick up his butt. Sakura sighed. Naruto, you really need to quit calling people by such terrible names. Naruto huffed. Hey, we've never been properly introduced. How would I know what their names are? The Pinkett groaned. Naruto, their names were announced in the preliminary matches. When he stared at her blankly, she groaned even longer. This is why I told you to pay attention. She bopped him on the head. Ow, Sakura-chan. That hurt. He rubbed his head and pouted while Sasuke hovered a small distance away looking peeved. Are you done yet? Grumbled the raven-haired teen. We have places to be. Shut up, bastard. Naruto held up a threatening fist. Sakura's eye twitched. She lurched forward and held up her own threatening fist at the blonde. Focus. You said you needed to check on Lee. Naruto stared at her blankly. Who? Lee. The one in the second exams. Sakura looked like she was ready to outright throttle Naruto and was contemplating where to bury the body as she hissed between her teeth, more so when his uncomprehending gaze didn't change. Bushy brows. She blurted. Kami-sama. He'd gotten her to resort to using his stupid nickname for Lee. She wanted to bash her head into a wall. Oh, why didn't you say so? Naruto perked up and started jerking his head this way and that. Where's bushy brows, Dottie? Anime and manga. Tenten finally registered what he was calling her and threw an appropriate amount of sharp pointies in his direction. She internally smirked when she heard him yelp and dive to the ground to avoid getting turned into a pincushion. She also ripped her gaze away from Neji's direction to acknowledge her sudden guests. He's over there. She pointed again towards Neji. The blonde grumbled something under his breath as he climbed to his feet and squinted across the street once more. He narrowed his eyes further before he huffed. Where? I don't see him. Is he inside? He eyed the tea shop warily. It was one of the places that really didn't like him and he avoided unless he was pranking them. Tenten shuddered. No, he's talking to Neji. She seemed to be straining not to look over there herself, and her pallor was even more sickly. Confused, Naruto examined the teen talking to Neji. His black hair was cut and styled in a tame tousle look, talking animatedly to the very sullen Hyuga. He was wearing fitted black ninja pants taped at the calf to the ankles with a dark green sleeveless tunic and wide belt. His hands were taped up to the elbow, and ninja pouch hung from his belt. And then he turned, as if feeling the group of 4 Tenten had given up trying to avoid looking again, and 5 if you count a hidden Kakashi on the roofs staring at him. He blinked and then he grinned widely, his teeth pinging in the afternoon light as he gave them a double thumbs up in greeting. A shrill shriek of horror escaped Sakura's lips, an automatic response after Lee's initial boisterous greeting and follow-up flirting. All she needed to see was the brilliant shine of teeth and she was literally climbing the wall behind Tenten. It had not helped that they had been stalking Lee and Guy since the idea of pranking Guy had blossomed. They had seen those blinging teeth far too often. Because it only helped their masks, all 3 of her teammates had encouraged this reaction until it really had become ingrained as a habit. Yosh, your flames of youth are bright as ever, Sakura-san. Your training with great enthusiasm is inspiring. Bellowed Lee, crossing the road in a flash to look up as Sakura disappeared over the top of the building and off across the rooftops. She made it 4 blocks before she remembered why they'd made a point to search Lee out, and grudgingly, started making her way back to the group. Naruto was plastered against the wall in shock, openly gaping at Lee as he cheerfully grinned at everyone. Sasuke was twitching in a nice spastastic fashion, looking ready to bolt at any second. Kakashi was twitching too, but that was from trying to suppress his laughter at his genin's reactions. "Where are your eyebrows?" blurted Naruto, pointing an accusing finger at Lee's face. Lee frowned in confusion. "Why? Right on my face, Naruto-san." He ran a finger along the finely trimmed eyebrow that was still broad but looked normal versus what it had looked previously. Tenten patted Naruto on the shoulder. "Trust me, I can't get over it either." She shuddered. "He looks normal. And I don't know how to feel about it." She rolled her eyes. "I threatened him when he was in our training ground because I thought he was a stranger intruding on our space." She shrugged. "But his voice and actions haven't changed, so I haven't completely freaked out and dragged him to T&I." A slow smirk suddenly crawled across Sasuke's face as he turned to Naruto. "Maybe you should talk to Ino too and do something about that hideous jumpsuit." "Hey, bastard. My jumpsuit is awesome." "No, it's not," remarked Sakura with a roll of her eyes, rejoining the group casually as if she hadn't left screaming for the hills. "Orange is not the new black." Tenten gave her a funny look but shook her head and also eyed the orange eyesore. "Why are you wearing something so bright? You realize that's a death trap, right? PSH. Tell that to the people who couldn't find me after a prank." Naruto boasted, crossing his arms with a defiant smirk. Tenten blinked. "Oh, you're that kid." Everyone gave her a look. "What the hell does that mean?" demanded Naruto, looking ready to grab her and shake her for such a comment. She smirked at him. "When you're ready to be a real ninja, let me know." She held out a high-grade kunai. After all, for ninja, quality is everything. She expertly spun it before it disappeared as quickly as she had produced it. She sauntered away, grabbing Lee's collar and dragging him behind her as she met up with Neji. They left down the street without a glance backwards, leaving Naruto shrieking a few profanities at them and how awesome a ninja he was. Forgotten on the roof, Kakashi was about rolling, the whole exchange having gone far better than he expected. Jiraiya was a renowned individual. Not only was he a Sannin, he's infamous for his novels and boisterous personality. It would be easy to brag about his exploits and notoriety, and he enjoyed doing so avidly. He's quite proud of his bingo book listing too. Getting kidnapped wasn't really a surprise, per se. 3 newbie genin dressed adorably like wannabe Anbu, however, was completely unexpected. How they managed to get the drop on him, he was startled to find pathetically easy. They'd laced his sake. He honestly isn't sure how, considering he hadn't noticed them in the brothel. Plus, well, he had no idea how they could have gotten into said brothel, considering the madam of the place was a retired kunoichi. Worse, the seals they'd slapped on him kept him completely bound and at their mercy. He was both impressed and horrified. He really hoped that no one ever found out about this, ever. "Jiraiya-sama," spoke the one in the middle. Jiraiya was impressed that their pale pink Anbu masks apparently had the voice-altering seal inside. Instead of any specific animals, all 3 masks had 3 simple whiskers-like marks on each cheek. Their only seeming difference was that the whiskers on each mask was in a different color, blue, red, and orange. "We have need of your services." Jiraiya just glared. He was bound and silenced. On top of that, he wanted to be sure he impressed upon them. He was pissed. The Hokage already approved. The one on the left with the orange whiskers pulled out a scroll with the Hokage's seal. Jiraiya snorted. He had a very hard time believing these 3 were mini Anbu in training. The seal was correct, but he still didn't believe it. After all, Sensei had made it quite clear he wasn't going to mess up any more children's youth by making them into hardcoreers too early. "Of course," admitted the one in the middle with the red whiskers, "I'm sure he meant to hand it to you personally." Jiraiya blinked at the humor lacing the tone, even with the seal muddling the identity. "When certain circumstances were met," continued the third on the right, blue whiskers looking almost black in the low-lit cave-like space. "And probably after the Chunin exams were over," finished orange. "When it would be too late, added Red. Red set the scroll on the ground between them. We'll be frank with you. We stole the scroll early so this could be taken care of immediately. Rumor has it that Sand and Sound are looking a little too eager. We need to declaw their pet. Jiraiya's expression remained nonplussed, but he was gaping on the inside. What the hell did these kids know? How did they even get that information? And how the hell were they able to steal such an important mission scroll? However much we wanted to do this on our own, we are not seal masters. Blue shifted slightly to set down a set of top-grade sealing supplies. Despite himself, Jiraiya was intrigued. Obviously, we are not trying to incite a reason for Sand's actions to be justified, murmured Orange. We are trying to present this as we only intended to help our ally via taking care of a problem they themselves didn't have safe a method to fix. Also, we can pretend that there was no ulterior motive to hamper their soon-to-be activities. Can we trust you to help? Asked Blue, leaving the and not turn us in immediately, hanging unsaid between them. Besides, remarked Red, who doesn't like messing with raccoons. All three chuckled, and it almost made Jiraiya's mask of stoicism crack. He wanted to know that story for sure, as clearly there was one if they were exchanging looks and laughing like that. Jiraiya was impressed further when the Red One reached out, and with a deft twist, removed the seal, keeping Jiraiya silent. How do I know that you're really trying to help? After all, this is unsanctioned at the moment. Jiraiya briefly thought about trying to yell, but he figured they had already accounted for that, considering how thorough everything else seemed to be set up. You'll tell Sarutobi afterwards, stated Blue, a shrug of nonchalance added in as well. He'll know who we are. And the chance he'll reprimand us for it is pretty limited, remarked Orange, sounding amused. No one wants to admit to kidnapping a Jinchuriki, sound reasons or not. Pointing out that we did it, one didn't have to see the smirk to know that it was there. The assuredness was practically oozing off the masked kid. At best, we'll get a silent reprimand via unpleasant mission or chore. Orange paused. Several, depending on how pissed he is that we went behind his back. Jiraiya frowned. You're not one of Danzo's, are you? Root. Red snorted. Even if we were, we couldn't admit it. Which said plenty in of itself. Besides, continued Red, Danzo's a. Jiraiya, despite his iron control, snorted with suppressed laughter. He also promptly choked on his own spit and had a good coughing fit before he could speak again. How can I trust you? He fixed his expression into firm demand, pretending he hadn't nearly asphyxiated himself trying not to laugh. Jiraiya swore they were all leering at him. You'd be dead. All three spoke in sync with the same flat inflection. Jiraiya's sweat dropped. That was a little freaky. He sighed. Fine. Let's go fix a seal. Yes. Red cheered. Let's go kidnap a Jinchuriki. And they promptly left via Shunshin without Jiraiya, leaving him blinking at the blank rocky wall across from him. Kami damned brats. Left me here without even having the decency to remove the seal. Get back here, brats. Gaara hated Konohagakure. It was too green, with not enough open spaces, and their ninja all seemed weak and useless. He'd tried distracting himself via the things Tamari called pranks, but somehow, they seemed off. Like 3 days ago, the redhead had painstakingly arranged an intricate trap that was riddled with multiple trips, triggers, and unpleasant things. Tamari had stepped on the first trigger, heard the telltale click, and shunshined out of there before even the first trap was fully sprung. Gaara was left to stare at an empty doorway filled with sand, mud, ink, and unidentifiable sludge splattered everywhere. Irritated, Gaara had Kankuro clean it up while he went back to scheming. He then attempted an even more complex trap the next day, trying to lure Kankuro into setting it off. Unfortunately, even though Kankuro has limited mental faculties, he still managed to step right over the trap, completely missing each and every little trigger. Gaara had stormed out, furious, especially as the hotel staff had pushed a cart into said trap and now the entire hall looked like a war zone, without any actual victims. The maid was plastered against the hallway entrance, looking horrified, but that horror wasn't even directed at Gaara. Which oddly frustrated the redhead, as he was actually responsible for the mess, but no one seemed to credit him with it. Hell, he'd been holding a spool of wire and half of the supplies he had gathered were still sitting behind him on the floor. Instead, the woman had gone screeching through the hotel, screaming about some orange demon. Gaara knew he didn't have the least bit of orange on his person. Not even his hair could be playfully called orange. That meant, once again, they were talking about someone else. Gaara was a little peeved. People here ignored him, not even one hateful or terrified look. He was totally going to fix that. His next prank, just yesterday, he tried to go simple. He had stumbled upon a very helpful book on pranks sitting in the hotel's lobby. He did not think it suspicious to find said book in a hotel lobby, of all places, reserved for light reading materials like magazines. He had simply rigged a door with a bucket of water on top. He eagerly waited inside the room he shared with Kankuro, who took 4 hours to get back. Gaara was half tempted to hunt him down and squish him for making him wait so long, but he really wanted his prank to work, and therefore remained scowling at the door instead. Kankuro opened the door, and the bucket missed, splashing across the floor inwards and actually managing to get Gaara instead. Admittedly, Gaara had never seen Kankuro disappear so quickly before in his life. Unhappily, Gaara had to rotate his sand out so his protective shell could dry out, mentally cursing at his third failed attempt. Gaara, however, was resolute. He did not fail. So, today, Gaara set up another semi-simple trap to launch a paint balloon at the unfortunate person who triggered it. Only for a stupid cat with a ribbon on its ear to jump between the balloon and the target, taking the full brunt of the mess and sparing the pink-haired civilian that had been about to be covered in red paint. Really, red was a great color. It reminded Gaara of blood. It was perfect. Gaara almost did the cat. He didn't get the chance because a team of genin had slammed the cat into a pet carrier and disappeared before he could even twitch a finger, the genin team looking almost vindictively gleeful. Gaara tried thumbtacks on Kankuro's chair. The buffoon tripped, sending the chair sprawling and the tacks on it flying through the air to impale themselves in Gaara's protective sand shell. Gaara was about 2 breaths away from unleashing Shukaku on the whole stupid village. Invasion be damned. Little baby raccoon, living out in the dunes. Here to take a little test. Hardly worth trying best. Crooned a voice. Gaara froze. Cold sweat prickled along his brow as he expanded his senses as far as he could. Little baby raccoon, always looking at the moon. Heavy with the weight of discord. And anger strikes a familiar chord. He was by himself, completely alone in an alley. He'd stormed off to get some air, struggling to keep from unleashing Shukaku. He hadn't been paying much attention to where he was going. He knew he instinctively moved to the shadows, far too used to avoiding people and their stares. And now, he was hearing the voices again. Little baby raccoon, about to receive a boon. About to lift the gloom. And save them all from their doom. His eyes darted around frantically, trying to locate the source of the voices. There were at least 3, and they were sing-songing, switching off between verses. He had hoped that the voices had only been around at that stupid tower in that forest during the last test. Apparently, that wasn't the case. Hey little baby raccoon, we're about to say boo. Gaara molded his chakra, attempting to shunshin to the rooftop of a nearby building. He found himself staring down at the alley he'd just been in, empty but for trash and shadows. He let out a shaky breath, feeling a bit of relief. Boo! Whispered a voice right next to his ear. Gaara's eyes widened before his entire world suddenly went dark and silent, his body locking up and refusing to obey his commands. His chakra was also immediately suppressed, scaring the redhead further, as he'd never been cut off from his chakra before. It was even more terrifying to be blind, bound, and not even have the voice of mother to fill the silence. For the first time in his life, Gaara felt truly alone. We need to hurry, murmured Blue, concern leaking into their tone. His pulses skyrocketing. Red grunted, hauling the redhead onto their back. Pretty sure no one has ever managed to subdue him so easily, cutting him off from everything but his own thoughts. Orange gave a soft hum. He's totally freaking out. Orange shrugged. I would too. The three disappeared. Tamari was starting to get worried. It was almost 11 at night. She hadn't seen Gara since breakfast. Him spending the day out alone wasn't usually something to be concerned about. After all, Gara was very capable of taking care of himself. But this wasn't Suna. This wasn't home. Worse, Gara had been acting strange since the second exam, and she wasn't quite sure how to address it, either to Baki or Gara. When she tried finding Baki after they'd finally be let out of that stupid tower, the man had reminded them to lay low and promptly disappeared. The only reason she knew he'd been around at all was that his dirty clothes pile had gotten bigger. She chewed on her thumbnail. She didn't really want to piss Gara off if he was fine. However, if he wasn't fine, dealing with Baki's rage would be less than pleasant. Groaning, Tamari gave up waiting and headed for the door. Kankuro was huddled in the corner, sulking over the fact he still hadn't found Karasu. He was next to useless, so she didn't even bother asking for his help. She would find Gara on her own, and destroy anyone who had the audacity to mess with him. It had nothing at all to do with the fact Gara was related to her. Nothing. The door burst inwards. Special delivery. Cheered a voice. A body was flung into Temari's startled arms. She automatically caught the body and instantly recognized the dark red hair. Gara. The door slammed shut before she even got a chance to see who was on the other side. Kankuro petulantly looked over his shoulder. Who was that? Don't know, Tamari said curtly, shifting her narrowed gaze to her youngest brother. He was completely limp, and she was concerned about his health. She turned him, his head flopping back as a loud snore escaped his lips. Tamari dropped him with a scream, plastering herself against the farthest wall. She was trembling, eyes wide as she held her fan defensively in front of her. Shish shish Shukaku. Kankuro stared at her blankly. Dude, what's up with you? He's asleep. She screeched, eyes wide with terror. Kankuro promptly joined his sister, managing to wedge himself between the wall and her to peer over her shoulder in horror. Gara remained inert on the floor, soft snores echoing loudly in the room. That's exactly how Baki found them 6 hours later. What's going on here? Demanded the Junin, looking stern. He was exhausted. He'd been spending countless hours trying to find his contact, Kabuto, since they arrived. He'd had no luck, and he was really starting to doubt the reliability of the new village and its leader. He didn't want to start a war with Konoha if Odo couldn't even maintain decent contact with its tentative allies. Honestly, he really didn't want to deal with Konoha anyway. This place was whack. Tamari pointed a trembling finger at something on the floor. Baki's gaze dropped slowly, mind still fuzzy because of a headache he'd been dealing with for the past week due to stress. So, it took him a second to comprehend the lump of flesh and head of dark red hair resting in the middle of the floor. Tamari squealed in terror when Baki shoved her closer to her youngest brother via squishing between the wall and Kankuro. The hell was up with these guys? Were they men, or what? Why were they hiding behind her? She wanted to turn around and berate them, loudly with an assist of sharp pointy objects. However, she was still too petrified of her snoring brother to dare and look away. How long has he been sleeping? Hissed Baki, peering over her other shoulder as Kankuro was still holding her other hostage. Tamari glanced at the clock on the wall. 6 hours, give or take. Baki blinked owlishly. He proceeded to shove her forward. Go check his seal. What? She shot him a betrayed look. If he's been asleep that long and Shukaku hasn't come out yet, you should be fine. He waved her forward nonchalantly, still hiding behind a mortified Kankuro. Bastard, she muttered darkly. She shot a glance at Gara, heart pounding in her chest. She took a long fortifying breath before slowly creeping forward. The redhead snorted, arm lifting. Why I. Tamari dove behind one of the beds. Gara rolled over, arm flopping back to the floor listlessly. Dead silence permeated the room, all three peering at the redhead with bated breath. Gara didn't move, soft snores once more escaping the snoozing redhead. Tamari, do it, commanded Baki, forcing Kankuro to stay put as his meat shield. Tamari shot him a murderous look. She'd pay him back, she swore it. Still, the blonde crept out from behind the bed and inched closer to her brother. He looked disturbingly peaceful, face relaxed, expression tranquil. She reached out cautiously, moving his clothing aside and forcing a little bit of chakra into his skin. She stared at the seal blankly. What am I looking for? She asked blandly, feeling even more ridiculous for her actions because she'd forgotten she didn't have any training in seals whatsoever. She was seriously going to destroy Baki for this humiliation later. Lift him up. Show me. Baki didn't do anything more than lift up on his toes to try and squint across the room. That's it. She was done with this BS. Why don't you take a nice long look? She roared, hefting Gara's dead weight and tossing him across the room with impressive precision. Baki screamed like a little girl while Kankuro bailed out the window without a backward glance. Gara flopped across Baki's petrified figure while Tamari growled and crossed her arms daringly. It then occurred to her that she'd just thrown her psychopath little brother across the room. She paled, arms dropping limply to her sides as she took a slow shaky step towards the door. Baki was still screaming shrilly, arms curled into his torso, fists tucked under his chin. No one noticed the muffled cackling in the corner as a camera was liberally capturing evidence of all the shenanigans. Gara kept snoring. Tamari counted to 50 before she managed to regather her courage. Baki, check his seal. Baki kept screaming, taking quick short breaths between long howls of terror. Tamari's eye twitched. Baki. She threw a shoe at him. The shoe struck true, smacking the man directly in his face and cutting off the screaming instantly. The shoe dropped from his face, a visible imprint of the soul left behind as he gave Tamari a deadpan look. Neither noticed the shoe land harmlessly on Gara's stomach. That was uncalled for, Baki remarked flatly. So was screaming like a little bee. Hem. Baki cleared his throat, interrupting her. The seal. He squatted, hiding his unease as he casually moved Gara's shirt aside. He visibly swallowed. He shuddered. It's what? Tamari demanded, moving 3 steps closer to the door as her hand rose to hover over the handle. It's fixed. Baki turned to stare at her blankly. It's fixed. Completely. Shukaku can't get out when he's sleeping. Tamari's legs gave out. She landed with a thump, head banging against the door as she stared up at the ceiling in shock. There goes that plan, she muttered at the fleeting thought that forcing Gara into a false sleep had been their ace in the hole for the invasion. Baki started spitting curses like it was going out of style. Kankuro knew Baki was ready to throw in the towel with Konoha. All of them could agree the place was nuts, but someone kidnapping Gara from right under their noses, just to fix his seal. No one was that stupid, right? I mean, kidnapping a Jinchuriki was already beyond stupid, ignoring the fact that they'd clearly succeeded. After all, pulling it off or not, it literally only made you a target for the village the Jinchuriki came from, as well as the Jinchuriki themselves. On top of that, it would give you a reputation that the other nations would pay attention to and most likely test you, depending how much of a threat they deemed you. But someone in Konoha had done it so smoothly, Gara was returned within a day, no worse for wear and Shukaku still locked away. And no, Kankuro nor his team thought anyone else had enough balls to kidnap their psychotic Jinchuriki other than Konoha. Nor did they think anyone else had a seal master capable of pulling off the seal work to fix a defunct seal, as that was no small feat because you had to understand the faulty seal thoroughly before correcting it. Yeah, the place was bogus. It really didn't help Kankuro's mood that the whole mess really just seemed to be getting uglier. It completely unnerved him to find Gaara still sleeping like the dead, his snores making Kankuro twitch when he himself tried to sleep. Years of paranoia when Gaara uttered such a sound weren't about to be broken in a month. He wondered how much Gaara would change once he woke up. Gaara's whole life was defined by his status as a Jinchuriki, and his whole personality had developed around it. There was no telling how different he would be, how much he would change now that the seal was fixed. Not only would it mess with his personality, it also had to mess with his sand and chakra control. Kankuro wasn't looking forward to his puppets being Gaara's targets for the training it would take to fully suss out how the new seal would affect Gaara's fighting capabilities. And then came the largest hang-up for the next month. What were they going to do about the invasion? They couldn't participate as planned with a Jinchuriki that couldn't unleash their Biju on command. None of his team were fools. They all knew they lost any chance they had to make a dent in Konoha's defenses, especially after witnessing and suffering the shenanigans in that Kami-forsaken tower. The whole invasion looked completely hopeless and stupid since they'd gotten an up-close and personal experience of Konoha itself. After all, everyone had thought Konoha was lax as hell, but clearly, all of them were on high alert and twitchy, like an enemy was around every corner. It begged the question, did they already know about the invasion? And if they did, why were they allowing Suna's team to participate as if nothing was amiss? Was it a challenge? Was it actual ignorance? Was it a trap? It also didn't help that their contact hadn't actually made contact. Baki was livid about that, ranting about wasted hours and useless spies. Kankuro made a point to whine just as loudly about how idiotic the whole invasion was anyway, repeatedly pointing out Karasu was gone and limited his own fighting capabilities. He knew his team found it supremely annoying, but Kankuro was bound and determined to get them to change their minds, to rethink this whole damned invasion. He didn't want to participate anymore. Without Karasu, the lack of sleep over Gaara's full-blown sleeping coma, and Konoha's just overall weirdness, he'd rather go back home where things were blessedly normal. He blatantly ignored the fact that normal meant a psychotic and bloodthirsty younger brother, low missions for low pay, and an overall sense of disconnect from pretty much everyone but his pushy and often violent sister. So, it would be less of a shock to find Kankuro was brought to tears when he spotted Karasu standing in the market square while he and Tamari were getting food for dinner, and avoiding the strangeness of a sleeping Gaara as much as possible. It didn't dawn on Kankuro that it was odd that Karasu was moving without his chakra manipulation. He didn't see the queer look that Tamari was giving the puppet, said puppet that was seemingly looking around as if lost. He didn't even question how odd it was that Karasu just happened to appear when they'd chosen to be in the market on whim after deciding Gaara's snores did not make for comfortable dinner atmosphere. Anime and manga. Things only got more strange as the puppet suddenly nodded to itself, setting down a battered hat on the ground at its feet. It straightened, and then proceeded to dance and sing. I'm a little teapot, short and stout. Here is my handle, here is my spout. Karasu's voice was high and reedy, grating on the ears. Tamari looked positively horrified, as if her belief that things couldn't possibly get worse had been shattered brutally. Kankuro, with tears blurring his vision, practically launched himself at his missing puppet. Karasu. Tamari was relieved he interrupted the show, still looking disturbed as Kankuro gleefully tried to hug Karasu's wooden frame. She was also trying to figure out how the thing was moving, as she couldn't sense or see any chakra strings attached to the puppet. Karasu let out a shriek of horror, startling the hell out of both of them. No, don't come near me. Karasu pulled away, curling in on itself like a maiden trying to protect her innocence. Kankuro was struck dumb, gaping at Karasu in disbelief while Tamari looked like she really wanted a stiff drink, or 5. Some weird blonde-haired kid stepped closer. Hey, what's wrong? Everything all right? He was looking at the puppet in concern, like it was a person, and not an obvious wooden puppet that shouldn't be able to move about or speak freely. Karasu clung to him with a wail. Don't let him come near me. The blonde kid stepped protectively in front of the puppet as 2 more young teens stepped forward. The pink-haired one looked wary, and the black-haired one looked irritated. Tamari almost sighed in exasperation. They were Genin from the exam. Their blonde teammate was an idiot. Why? What's wrong? The Pinkett stepped forward and put a consoling hand on Karasu's shoulder. A groan escaped the Suna Kunoichi's lips. Seriously? Was the whole team that dense? Kankuro spluttered, gesturing wildly as he tried to comprehend what was going on. He was failing miserably at it. Karasu simpered as it huddled against the blonde kid's back. I was just minding my own business, trying to make some coin. The puppet shuddered and let out a whimper. Tamari wondered if the rumors that Yamanaka could erase memories were true. I didn't do anything, protested Kankuro. He's lying, screeched Karasu. He does things to me, puts things. Kankuro was mortified, face slack and bug-eyed. Hey. His arms pinwheeled about as his frazzled nerves just made the whole situation worse. I mean, not that way. It was an utter shitshow. Cammy had to hate her, Tamari decided. She had to have done something horrendous to deserve this. This doesn't happen to normal people, right? Anime and manga. Tamari stepped forward. Hand over the puppet. It's our property. Property. Bellowed the blonde kid. You can't treat someone that way. He got up in her face, expression thunderous. Tamari nearly lost her cool and obliterated the kid, until she saw the twinkle of amusement in his eye and the small twitch of a mischievous smirk. Kami-sama, they were pranking Kankuro. She honestly didn't know if she wanted to shriek in fury or laugh uproariously. Then, a strange feeling overtook her, a sense of blessed serenity. Everything was suddenly crystal clear, like the beauty after a heavy rainstorm. He was letting her in on the gag. Tamari changed history. She let go. Property is property. She scoffed loudly, crossing her arms and looking down her nose at her fellow blonde. What Kankuro decides to do with said property is not my business. However, it is my business to see that said property is returned. Kankuro turned to her and gave her a look of absolute betrayal. I don't do anything like don't say it like why would you? The unholy glee in the blonde kid's eyes was like a breath of fresh air. Tamari wasn't exactly sure how it happened, but she had the odd feeling she'd somehow just made a friend. You shouldn't treat anyone that way. Karasu isn't just property. The kid shook a righteous fist. Tamari didn't even bother wondering how the kid knew the puppet's name. Karasu is property. Kankuro can do as he wishes. She waved a hand airily. Anime and manga. Kankuro looked like his soul was being ed out, hands grasping vaguely at the air as if trying to find something to ground himself within all the insanity. That isn't right, protested the blonde kid. PSH, right, wrong, does it matter? We're ninja. If you don't return his property, we'll accuse you of theft. Karasu bemoaned its lot in life piteously in the background. Tamari really wanted to know how they managed that. TCH. It's wrong. The shorter blonde growled, looking properly offended on the puppet's behalf, his teammates hovering in the background. The Pinkett looked anxious now, while the black-haired one looked like he wanted to burn them all to ash for interrupting his day. So stealing, rebutted Tamari, shrugging nonchalantly. Naruto, maybe we should just, the Pinkett trailed off, shuffling foot to foot in uncertainty. It isn't right, Sakura-chan. The Pinkett winced. But she's not wrong. Stealing isn't right either. Tamari gave him a gloating look, making him hiss at her like an angry cat. Fine, he shouted, throwing up his arms. He turned to Karasu, expression serious. If he does anything weird, you let me know. I'll take care of it, believe it. Kankuro looked torn between being elated and affronted. Karasu, despite not having any actual facial expressions whatsoever, managed to portray a grudging and tearful agreement, grasping the blonde in a quick farewell hug, which was returned. Karasu then shuffled slowly towards Kankuro, as if headed for its doom. Kankuro clearly couldn't decide if he should grab Karasu and run or if his own puppet would explode if he dared to try. Tamari grunted. Take your toy home. I'll finish getting dinner, give you time to clean it up. Kankuro shot her a pained look as he hovered anxiously around Karasu as he showed the puppet the way back to the hotel. Naruto turned to scowl at her, clearly sizing her up. He shouldn't be allowed toys. Tamari was trembling in an attempt to withhold her mirth. No, he really shouldn't, she agreed smoothly, her voice barely warbling on her suppressed laughter. Kankuro was finally out of sight, and the blonde Konoha genin shot her a victorious smirk. Well played, he said, voice still sounding grudging even though his expression was gleeful. Not bad yourself, she responded in kind, her own smirk lifting the corner of her mouth. Later, twerp. Bye, porcupine. He listlessly lifted a hand in grudging farewell as he immediately turned his back on her. Tamari decided to treasure the memory of today for life. She'd never seen Kankuro so discombobulated before in his entire existence. Worth it. Totally worth it. She was in such a good mood she bought Gaara a nightcap of a raccoon and put it on his sleeping head in a blissful daze, completely missing the terrified look Baki was shooting at her. Kankuro was sitting in a corner in a catatonic state, apparently having finally cottoned on to the fact Karasu had been moving and talking on its own. It was sitting against the wall inert beside him now. When in Konoha, she absently mused, do as they do, right? It was too stressful to do otherwise, after all, and she'd had enough stress to last a lifetime already, thank you very much. Hiruzen growled, spiking his key. Am I boring you? He was somewhat fed up with the team. Their antics were beyond ridiculous, even if he couldn't necessarily prove they were responsible for even a third of it. The sheer flood of paperwork spoke for itself, after all. Naruto spared him a glance. Duh. Sarutobi almost split his desk in two. You realize I called you in here because of your actions, correct? He waved vaguely at a new pile of papers that was already a foot high on the desk. About some sort of disturbance in the marketplace. Naruto had the gall to roll his eyes. I don't know why that's even a thing. I handled it. The third's eye twitched. Being accused of theft is not handling it. He shot a glare at the sheer number of reports. He was disgusted with the village's poor view of Naruto, especially because they deemed it necessary to file a useless and ridiculous number of reports to try and besmirch the young blonde. Kami-sama, was he sick of it? PSH. If you can't handle a little paperwork, you should just give me that hat now, old man. Goated said blonde. Ha, I can handle a little paperwork. Sarutobi twitched when the piles increased. You're a cage, right? Yelled Naruto. Of course I am. The third yelled back, irritated because the paperwork was still growing. Everyone else was pretending to be preoccupied with other things while Naruto and Hiruzen had, yet again, another ludicrous verbal spat. Anime and manga. Then use a cage bunshin. Naruto pointed an accusing finger at the third. Hiruzen roared and summoned 6 Cage Bunshin. Cage Bunshin. Hiruzen and Naruto had a stare down. Naruto scoffed. TCH. Better not be slacking, old man. Or, that hat will be mine sooner than you think. Sarutobi, trying to act imperious, scowled back at him. You have a long way to go. Everyone else witnessing the scene sweat drop. Can we go now? Demanded Sasuke, obviously done with Naruto's antics. Kakashi secretly hoped that the discovery of the paperworker would help lower Sarutobi's ire towards him and his team. He also wondered if it should be made mandatory for all future Cage to learn it in order to get the hat. Sarutobi waved a hand dismissively, trying to look cool and composed. That was the only reason I called you in here and away from your training for the exams. With Forjin Shinobi in the village, we have to take all complaints seriously. Perception is everything, after all. He pulled out his pipe and chewed on it. Sarutobi completely ignored the blatant looks of disbelief his ninja were giving him. Alright, everyone but the first 2 competitors, please leave the arena. The proctor pointed towards the entrance. Neji didn't move, scowl firmly in place as he absently stared down the proctor. Ino twisted this way and that, trying to spot her childhood friend. She hadn't seen Sakura while they'd all been waiting, and was concerned she was going to miss her match. Where is she? She hissed, sharply poking Shikamaru in the side. Shikamaru grunted and shot her a dark look. Because he was looking at Ino, he completely missed the person who hadn't moved as they approached, causing the dark-haired boy to run into them by accident. TCH. Shikamaru stumbled back a step, secretly startled when it felt like he'd run into an immovable object. The other person didn't budge an inch. Sakura, screeched Ino, pointing dramatically at the person Shikamaru had just run into. Shikamaru couldn't quite stop the instant reaction of his eyes widening slightly. Her pink hair was currently mostly hidden beneath a black bandana that had a forehead protector sewn on the front. The teen was in an oddly familiar slouch, nose buried in a bright fluorescent pink book. She was dressed in an outfit eerily similar to her Junin instructor, Anbu pants taped at the lower calf to her ankles, long-sleeve form-fitting Anbu shirt and plated fingerless gloves, and she even had her weapon's punch strapped to her thigh. The differences were the fact that she wasn't wearing a face mask, her belt had several more pouches that a medic would carry, she had kept her arm guards, and her vest was a collarless short dark red trimmed with silver and Kakashi's henna heji in silver on the back. She looked so completely different that none of the Konoha ninja in the exam had recognized her. Did you say something? Remarked Sakura absently as she turned a page. Everyone who knew Kakashi shot him horrified looks, and all the genin who knew Sakura gawked at her in disbelief. You're stealing my thunder, boomed Guy up in the stands, crying manly tears. You say something. Kakashi glanced at Guy with a distracted air. Asuma nearly inhaled his cigarette when he snorted out a suppressed laugh. Kurenai rolled her eyes in exasperation. Hayate coughed before he sighed and waved at the stunned genin who had stopped in their tracks. Hey, move it, I told all of you to get out of here. He shot them all a pointed look, a clear note of warning in his voice. Neji sneered, not impressed in the least. Once the arena was clear, Hayate motioned Neji to move across from Sakura, who was clearly still reading and ignoring everything else around her. Are you ready? Asked Hayate after he went over the rules. His sweat dropped when Sakura just turned another page. Begin. He cut his hand through the air and leapt back. And everyone watched in silence as Sakura continued to read and not pay a lick of attention to Neji's stiff form. Sakura. What the hell? Bellowed Ino, half hanging over the railing as Shikamaru and Choji clung to her to keep her from falling. You're supposed to be fighting. Sakura took a slow blink and lifted her head to spot Ino waving her arms in fury. Quit goofing off, yelled Ino, a tick mark on her head throbbing. Oh. Sakura closed the book with a small asterisk Pam F and put it in one of her pouches. It was actually put into a seal hidden on the inside flap of said pouch, so it didn't take up extra room and was further protected than just the pouch could give. She glanced around at the empty arena and then seemed to notice Neji glaring at her. She listlessly lifted a hand in belated greeting. Yo. Kakashi was absolutely preening on the inside as Neji looked ready to spontaneously combust at the blatant disregard. The Jonin was totally giving her a cookie after this. Rather than the fight starting immediately after said greeting, Sakura once again started looking around. She paused when she caught sight of a head of familiar silver hair in the stands. He did a fantastic job pretending to read, even as he giggled aloud at the perfect drama his student was stirring. Kakashi-sensei. Sakura stared at him, once again ignoring Neji. Kakashi-sensei, aren't you going to answer your student? Kurenai raised an eyebrow at him. He lifted his head and gave her a flat stare. Your student is calling you, remarked Kurenai, eyebrow twitching as all of them could hear Sakura still calling up to her sensei. Kakashi stared for a long tense moment, to the point Kurenai was struggling not to squirm under his unblinking gaze. Which one? Kurenai blanched. Everyone could hear Sakura still shouting his name from below, not to mention neither of the boys on the team were present. Are you serious? Ma, I'm Kakashi, not serious. The silver-haired Jonin waved his hand airily. Azuma quickly stepped between the two when Kurenai started reaching for her shuriken. Ahem. Your female student seems to want your attention. He pointed at said student. Kakashi flopped his head to the side, as if considering Azuma's words. Finally, he turned and stepped towards the railing. Pinky. A kunai whizzed by his ear, courtesy of said student. Ah, you noticed. Sakura gave a slow nod. She stuffed her hands in her pockets with a bored expression. Gloves off. Neither spoke loudly, but their voices seemed to carry clearly throughout the arena. Kakashi blinked. Hadn't he told them yesterday? A hidden smile crept across his face. He gave an exaggerated sigh. Ma, I supposed you should, shouldn't you? Don't want Sasuke stealing all the thunder after all. He flicked his wrist at her in a shooing motion. Gloves off. A tense beat of silence followed as student and sensei locked eyes. Kakashi folded his arms and leaned back, and Sakura shifted to finally acknowledge the Hyuga glaring murderously at her. Guy was shooting his rival tense looks, debating what his comments really entailed. Azuma was still trying to keep Kurenai from stabbing Kakashi. A blur of movement expressed Neji's sudden lack of patience. He crossed the gap between the pink-haired genin and himself in a heartbeat, hands flying forward with swift intent. Whiff. Asterisk. Neji's head turned slightly to his left. Sakura was standing 5 feet to the left of where she had been. She languidly began stretching. I suppose that means I have to put in some effort, she remarked blithely. Neji was so enraged he tried to strike her again while she was mid-stretch to touch her toes. That's rather rude, called a voice behind him. Neji whirled to find the pink-haired genin standing calmly behind him, shading her eyes as she stared up at the sky. Kakashi had to hide more giggles behind his book. His student was glorious. Neji was predictably seething. The veins around his eyes were bulging and his posture was so rigid he looked constipated. You're not fit, began Neji. Poof. Asterisk. Sakura was standing right in front of him. The back of her hand made contact with his face before he even finished wondering how the hell she knew Shunshin, and how she seemed to have mastered it. He could feel his cheek already swelling due to the metal plating on her glove. He had walked in here expecting a civilian shinobi to be little better than an academy student. He wasn't prepared for a clanless insignificant nobody to immediately land a blow without even seemingly trying. Change is inevitable, she murmured, eyes suddenly intensely focused on his. If you want to cage yourself, to clip your own wings, be my guest. She flicked her forehead protector. The rest of us are going to soar. Neji grit his teeth, lip curling back in a snarl. You know nothing about your seal, she interrupted calmly. I know someone who has it worse than you, and they're 10 times the shinobi you'll ever be. The passion in her eyes caught Neji completely off guard. Who was she talking about? How could anyone have it worse? And how could she know them? Then you know I'm trapped, he began, fists clenched. Tag, came Sakura's sing-song voice, once again standing 10 feet away after slicing open part of Neji's sleeve. The next several breathless moments were filled with Neji attempting to strike Sakura and her cutting up his clothes in different spots. It didn't take genius to see that all the cuts were above important locations that would debilitate him if she struck any deeper. But, to his secret relief, she was starting to slow down. Her breathing was coming faster and her movements were a bit slower. If he pushed himself, he would be able to catch her. He knew he could. After all, no member of Team Guy lacked endurance. Also, her Shunshin seemed to be ing her chakra dry. He smirked. He had this in the bag. He charged once more, and to his glee, he indeed landed several blows to Sakura's right arm. She cursed silently to herself, having not expected him to get such a boost in speed. But then again, he was prideful enough he probably hadn't been attacking her with everything he had. Which really was a big mistake for anyone trying to take the Chunin exams. After all, you never knew what kind of tricks people were hiding up their sleeves. They broke apart, the kunai she'd been using flying through the air to land with a small thud several meters away. Sakura winced as she quickly used her left hand to start opening up her tenketsu. Neji's eyes widened, startled the Pinkett had such skill in the medic field already. There were several gasps in the stands when others cottoned on to what she was doing as well. Kurenai's head snapped to Kakashi in surprise. She's already that far advanced. How did she have time for it between ninja training and missions? Kakashi blatantly ignored her as he peered at his precious, "Oh, Susa-chan. Don't be fooled. He's got a snake hidden in there." Asuma quickly redirected Kurenai's attention to the arena. "Look, Neji's not letting her heal herself." The bearded Jonin was getting tired of Kakashi tempting fate. Kurenai had no patience for such foolery, and the perverse book always tended to make her temper even more explosive. He flicked a moody glare at the silver-haired Jonin, only to gape when Kakashi winked at him. The bastard. Ooh. The crowd's loud combined cheer drew his attention back to the arena instead of ways to eviscerate his fellow Jonin. Neji was lunging towards Sakura, trying to stop her from completing her task. She managed to duck out of the way, but it was still enough that she had to stop healing her arm. Neji pivoted sharply, keeping up the attack and landing quite a number of blows on both arms. He leapt back with a confident sneer. "Can't heal yourself now, can you?" Sakura was slumped forward, wincing because indeed, both of her arms were useless. To free her arms, she would have to split her focus in order to slowly flood her tenketsu with medical chakra. That would take a lot longer than being able to use one of her hands to directly focus on the damaged area. Good thing she'd prepared for exactly this scenario, hoped for it, actually. Time to humble this fool. Kakashi's smirk went unnoticed, pride in his student making his chest swell. This was about to get good. Sakura blinked, stared at him, and then threw her head back and laughed. Neji wasn't the only one to be a bit unnerved by the unexpected response. Sakura's chuckles died out and she smirked at the black-haired teen across from her. "How silly. Let me disabuse you of that notion." She snapped her left leg up into the air until it was completely vertical and pressed against her torso. Neji nearly missed the object flying at him, dodging at the last moment and only getting a cut to his cheek instead of missing an eye. The kunai hit a tree behind him with a solid thunk, and nearly everyone leaned forward in excitement. Sakura was already moving as Neji looked back at her in disbelief. She shifted, lifting her foot to show off the kunai clinging to the bottom. Neji balked as Sakura flitted forward, quickly put on the retreat as Sakura's feet struck uncomfortably close. Those watching were startled, awed as the pink-haired girl seemed to dance across the arena, chasing Neji in a spiraling pattern. It took more time than he wanted to finally reach a stable enough stance to start fighting back. He tried to attack her legs, but she always twisted and ducked out of reach at the last moment. It was quite infuriating. Finally, he thought he'd be clever and attack the bottom of her feet, kunai or not. His strike landed true, to the left of the kunai handle and right in the middle of her foot. Only, instead of his chakra pushing into the limb and closing off the tenketsu, a jolt of chakra shot out of her foot and exploded in his hand. His entire hand was instantly numb while the kunai went spinning off past his head. He jumped away with a pained hiss, hand pulled close. He tried flexing his hand, but it was responding oddly. She had stopped as soon as he leapt away, a smirk still in place. "What's the matter? Something wrong with your hand? What did you do?" He glared at her, clenching his hand in a fist, wincing as pain lanced through it and up his arm. Sakura shook her head back and forth. Tisk, tisk, that would be secret. Furious, he tried to attack her again, more cautious even though he still committed himself to his actions. She easily danced around his attacks, especially as his left hand was still not functioning properly. He was pretty sure he wasn't pushing any of his chakra out of the fingers of his left hand like normal, either, after he actually managed to land a blow to her calf and she didn't even stumble. What had she done? She gracefully leapt out of reach, giving them both a short pause. "Let's amp things up a bit, yeah." Without preamble, she hopped up into the air and spun. Neji's eyes widened, his brain screaming at him that she shouldn't be this talented. He ducked and weaved around the four kunai that had been launched at him, startled at how accurate the attack was. She landed and paused once more. Ready. Her grin was half mad. That was just the intro. The pinkett was in the air and her legs were a blur. Neji also became a blur, struggling to dodge or deflect a ridiculous amount of kunai. Where in Kami-sama's name was she getting them from? The only reason he hadn't been tagged yet was due to the intense training sessions he had with Tenten. The problem was, she was able to fire off 3 to 5 kunai during a single kick, each coming at him from different angles. Tenten only threw weapons from her hands, so they all tended to come in at the same trajectory. Up in the stands, said bun-haired girl was practically drooling. I never thought of doing it that way. I can't wait for training. Her aura flared in determined excitement. Yosh. That's the spirit. Cheered Lee. Tenten's eyes snapped to him with a burning intensity. You'll be my first target. She started cackling madly, causing Lee's smile to wobble a moment in uncertainty. After all, Tenten was already incredibly skilled with her weapons. Amplifying it to this degree, it actually made Lee a little nervous. Down below, Neji was not ready for Sakura to perform an aerial set of cartwheels to the side, still flinging a horrifying number of deadly projectiles at him as she went. The new angle of attacks was not good for defending against, and he was struggling to keep up. His hand was quite a hindrance at this point, whereas Sakura seemed to be completely at ease without either of her arms working. She used chakra to jump even higher, and the sheer number of kunai she started kicking at him pushed him to pull out his trump card. 8 trigrams palms, revolving heaven. The stands were filled with odd gasps as the defensive flare of rotating chakra flung all of the attacking kunai wide, making Sakura yelp as she was forced to dodge her own kunai. Sakura landed and Neji's rotation stopped. Both combatants looked at each other with calculated stares. Both were a little winded now, and both were clearly a bit roughed up. Impressive, complimented Sakura. It seems you're a sneaky little Hyuga, using a main branch technique. Neji scowled, frustrated she seemed to have so much information about him and his clan. Try as you might, you are still fated to fail this day. Sakura shrugged. Well, I am out of kunai. That last attack was supposed to be more effective. Her grin returned. But, I'm not quite done yet. They both barreled forward. Just as they were about to close, Sakura dipped low and kicked dirt right into Neji's eyes. He shouted in alarm, attempting to attack where he'd last seen her to push her back so he could try and clear the dirt from his eyes. She was already moving, however, rolling easily to the side and dodging the deadly attack that would have hit her heart had she not moved. The empty attack caused him to stumble, and she hopped to her feet and began a series of lashing kicks, all of which were laced with focused spikes of chakra. Neji grunted, startled when he felt the chakra invade his limbs, making them go numb. It was very similar to the Hyuga attacks. What was going on? Really? Being blind and injured, it didn't take long before Neji wavered and fell to his knees. He finally managed to clear the dirt from his eyes, blinking up at Sakura towering over him. She smiled and lifted an arm to wave. Her short pink hair was blowing freely in the wind, her bandana having been lost at some point during all of her acrobatics. He gaped. How? She shrugged. To be honest, the Hyuga are quite formidable. But, sadly, instead of trying to find ways to improve, it seems they're blinding themselves to their own weaknesses. I understand the sheer impressive effort it takes to hit the tenketsu with the accuracy you do, even with the aid of the Byakugan. But, why not incorporate the feat? Why not add weapons? Why not use that impressively honed chakra control for more than just your gentle fist? Really, I'm sad that you're limiting yourself so much. You're obviously very talented and dedicated. You could do so much more. She shook her head sadly. Neji was too baffled to formulate a sentence. The first retort that it was, against tradition, died before it even reached his lips. After all, had he not broken tradition to learn the heavenly rotation? Also, chirped Sakura, holding up her hands in a seal. Just to be sure that you acknowledge your defeat and forfeit, an example of what I could have done had you continued. She sent out her chakra and the kunai littered around Neji all lit up in a small glow. If I wanted, these could have been the explosive tags instead of just small light-inducing ones. She winked. But I really don't like the idea of using such extreme measures against fellow Konoha ninja for a test. Neji gaped at her. Not only was she freely using her arms and channeling chakra to them without needing to visit a medical nin, she had also hidden seals on her kunai that he had completely missed. If she had been an enemy and had cause to want him dead, he would be right now. It was unsettling and humbling, especially since she was from a civilian family. Usually he dismissed anyone that was not of the proper lineage or background. The world played into the hands of the favored, and Neji was obviously bitter about it. But, he was also so prideful he still held the belief that he also had that superiority, even if there were things out of his reach. Your arms, he muttered. Sakura put a finger to her lips in a mock secretive fashion. If your chakra control and experience permits it, medical jutsu are very versatile. She winked. You just have to be creative. She looked down at her hand as she clenched it into a fist. Also, they've been good to go since you revealed your rotation. She giggled. I just thought it would be more fun this way. Ino was spluttering up in the stands, too indignant for words. When had Sakura gotten this cool? Oh. Sakura thumped her fist into her palm. She briskly moved to stand in front of Neji, who tensed but couldn't summon any sort of defense. This is a really shoddy seal, she remarked, twirling a paintbrush in one hand and holding a bottle of ink in the other. When had she even pulled those out? And from where? Neji stared in mute disbelief as she confidently pushed his headband aside and painted something on his forehead. Hiyashi was on his feet in the stands, barreling towards Kakashi who had lowered his book and lifted his own headband. When she was done, the brush and ink disappeared into seeming thin air. She smiled down at him gently, and for a moment, Neji thought she looked angelic. A gift from Team 7. Her smile was a little brittle, eyes full of shadows. There are enough of us chained by destiny. Don't let it chain you. She placed her palm on his forehead and filled the seal with chakra. Neji screamed. Hinata grasped the rail, looking torn about jumping down or trusting that Sakura didn't mean Neji harm. After all, Team 7 had come to her to get a look at the seal about 4 months ago, insisting that they only wanted to help. As the future head, Hinata wanted to know as much as she could about the seal to find a way to finally be rid of it. Neji gasped, wavering on his knees. Sakura grasped his shoulder to steady him. What did you do? He rasped, voice raw. No one can control you, Sakura said firmly, making sure to make eye contact with him so he could see how serious she was. The seal now performs the way it was supposed to upon its inception. If you are captured, you can activate it yourself, or it activates automatically upon your death. Your dojutsu will be safe. Have Hinata test it, to be sure, as she can be trusted to have your safety in mind. She tightened her grip, murmuring the last bit so only he could hear. Other than that, you're free. The Hokage's pipe clattered to the floor. He knew exactly what this meant as Hiyashi came storming towards the Hokage's box. He groaned and dropped his face in his hands. More paperwork. Team 7 was going to be the death of him. Hokage-sama, seethed Hiyashi. A part of him was secretly relieved his nephew might actually be free. The problem, however, lay in the fact that the elders would be furious if the Pinket's words were true. It was supposed to be impossible for anyone to tamper with the seal. It was why it was so carefully designed. Hyuga-sama, interrupted Kakashi, having somehow sidled up beside Hiruzen before Hiyashi could even start formulating the beginnings of his vitriol. I'm so relieved my students were able to help your clan. That faulty seal was especially dangerous, and I'm glad they were able to rectify the problem before it became a detriment to both the Hyuga and Konoha. Kami-sama, they'd spent months working on the damn thing. It was one of the reasons the hot springs now had an extra large pool and an odd surplus of fish at Ichiraku's, sans heads of course. couldn't have any Hyuga noticing the familiar seal that had been placed on them. Hiyashi bristled, barely managing to keep his visage frozen in only faint contempt instead of outright fury. Faulty seal? He asked. The silver-haired Junin hummed the affirmative. It is quite a hole in Konoha's and the Hyuga's defenses if an enemy need only capture one main branch member and have them activate the seal against their own kin. Over half of the Hyuga would be wiped out in one fell swoop and Konoha would lose a formidable part of their shinobi forces. We can't afford that, not after one clan has already been taken so brutally from us. After all, the Hyuga heiress is a newly minted ninja and is actively leaving Konoha's walls. He gave them an eye smile. Once their work is confirmed, this is a very valuable asset for Konoha and the Hyuga, and I hope that my team will be compensated accordingly. Hiyashi barely kept his jaw from dropping. The audacity. Hiruzen was stuck between wanting to smirk at Kakashi's sound argument and Hiyashi's obvious indignant fury at being outmaneuvered, or crying over the fact this meant lots of paperwork, again. Kakashi-san, interrupted a third voice. All four men turned to find Hinata respectfully waiting just behind her father's shoulder. Kakashi smiled. Yes. Compensation for Team 7's work will be forthcoming once the Hyuga clan can properly the real value of their work. I am pleased that they took such initiative and already have results. She gave Kakashi a small bow. Hiyashi's eye was twitching as he struggled to keep himself in check. He honestly didn't think she approached Team 7. However, she was showing impressive backbone for inserting herself as she had, ready to take full blame from the elders instead of allowing Team 7 to be the target of their ire. That she did it in front of two Hokages was also of note, and not a single stutter or hesitance in her person either. He was getting a migraine. He was both elated and terrified. The elders would not be pleased, especially if the seal worked as the genin claimed. With Hinata sticking her neck out, it implied she had been involved in some manner, and that could be very dangerous for her. But, on the plus side, she was taking her position as heiress seriously, and what Kakashi said was worth the possible danger if it was enough to sway the elders. After all, Hiyashi could possibly argue this in his favor and save his youngest from ever getting branded. But damned if it wasn't going to be a nightmare to get through. Father. Hinata was looking at him, and Kami-sama, did she look like her mother? Hiyashi tipped his head in a small bow towards Hiruzen. I am all too eager to express our hopeful success in this regard. I will schedule a meeting when further results arise. He turned and grasped Hinata's shoulder, gently guiding her away from the cages and towards his original seat with Hanabi. He could feel the tension in her, and despite himself, he allowed a small smirk to escape his iron control. Brave words. Hinata's eyes drifted to Neji, who was being picked up by the medic Nin. It is worth it. Neji sneezed explosively, blinking owlishly at the medic Nin who were giving him bemused looks. Hiyashi gently squeezed Hinata's shoulder before he removed his hand. You've got guts. He stepped away as she moved back to the rest of the genin in the third exam. He let his smirk last for another 3 seconds before he reclaimed his stoic visage. And then Hanabi glomped him and started babbling an endless amount of questions. It was really hard to look dignified with a child dangling from your neck like a monkey and bombarding you with so many questions it was impossible to actually distinguish what was being asked. What made him think Hanabi was the disciplined one? He totally missed her slipping a timed storage seal down the back of his kimono. Hiyashi froze, his pale visage, somehow, managing to turn stark white. Sweat beaded along his brow, and his hand unconsciously gripped Hanabi's shoulder a little tighter. Subscribing to anime streaming services. It was the middle of the second match, and Hanabi was internally cheering that the timing could not have been more perfect. The young Hyuga could barely contain a smirk before turning to her father with concern. Is something the matter? Her tone was artfully crafted with the perfect amount of worry and innocence. Hiyashi swallowed thickly. He dared to shift slightly, to see if he indeed felt what he did. His stomach bottomed out when, yes, indeed, he had felt something uncomfortably warm, wet, and slimy pooling. Father. Hanabi's voice was more urgent, hand darting out to reach up and gently tug on his sleeve. Hiyashi ran through a mental list of explanations. He hadn't been feeling ill. He had his usual breakfast, and therefore had not eaten anything abnormal that would explain his current condition. No one could have gotten past the guards to poison his food, either. The branch members knew better than to try anything themselves, and perished the thought that the food dared be spoiled. That left. Oh no. 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 Hiyashi stiffly edged his head so that he could look down on his youngest's visage. I fear that I have somehow managed to become the target of the vile pranksters that have been plaguing the village. Actually, maybe that was the better option. It was a lot less demoralizing if it was a prank. If anyone thought he couldn't control his own bowels. Hiyashi felt lightheaded. What? Hissed Hanabi, teeth bared in indignant fury on her face. How dare they? She leapt to her feet. I will ensure that they get retribution for their tasteless trick. And she immediately stormed off towards Hinata before she lost it and started laughing hysterically in her father's horrified face. Hiyashi watched her with a faint proud smile. She was growing up so quickly, but still, such youthful excitement over his discomfort. She walked right up to Hinata and tugged on her sleeve. Her elder sister turned, eyes widening slightly in surprise. Hanabi, what's wrong? It's a terrible thing. Just unspeakable. I can't even, there aren't words. Hanabi flailed her arms dramatically and switched between a woeful and furious expression, making sure that some of her seemingly odd gestures were directed towards her father. Then she snapped to attention and looked earnestly up at Hinata's bemused face. The elder Hyuga knew that her sibling was up to something, but she honestly wasn't quite sure what. The girl had gotten awfully good at being sly with her tricks, and Hinata wasn't sure what the younger girl expected her to do. Until she promptly held up a determined fist. I promised father retribution. Hinata's hand lashed out and grasped Shino's jacket in a flash. The startled boy flinched, but didn't pull away. He turned a concerned eye on his teammate when he felt the tremors in her hand. Only to blink in surprise when he realized she wasn't worried or scared, she was doing everything in her power not to laugh. Hanabi. There was a faint scolding to Hinata's tone, but everyone in her team heard the mirth underneath. Bad girl. And Hinata calmly bopped her sister gently on the head. Go tell father that he doesn't need to worry himself. She paused. How bad is it? She tilted her head slightly to the side. Hanabi's responding smirk was absolutely wicked. Oh dear, murmured Hinata, shooting her father a pitying glance. Hold off for 3 weeks. She sighed. Do we need a distraction? Subscribing to anime streaming services. Hanabi snickered and leaned forward to whisper in Hinata's ear. No. When he stands, the second trigger will go off and the seal will disintegrate and trickle out of his clothes, too small to notice. He will think it's getting worse, but nothing outward will appear and all signs of his distress will vanish as if they never were. Kami-sama, Hanabi's friends had thoroughly corrupted her little sister. If she hadn't caught her in the act of trying to prank her all those months ago, she would never have gotten the chance to wrangle out the deal she had with her sister. She was immensely glad she'd convinced Hanabi that all of Hanabi's transgressions could be forgiven, if Hanabi came to her when she committed a new one for Hinata to merit out retribution. It was, admittedly, a very meek pittance, but Hinata felt that people deserved it after how they treated Naruto all those years. Especially as it meant Hinata was never a target of said transgressions. Really, Hinata,